Boy. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Night with the Experts in February. My name is Dave Kraft. I am the Director of Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago. We do a monthly program on the last Thursday of each month where we invite experts on various topics relating to nuclear power, nuclear waste, renewable energy, alternatives to nuclear power, and give you the opportunity to spend some time talking with the experts. We've asked our experts to keep their remarks kind of brief, and that'll give you more time to ask questions and get into some dialogue. Tonight, we're doing something a little bit different, though, on the topic. The issue of AI and its effects on the grid system, on energy demand, is very much in the news these days, and we're very pleased to have Abe Scarr, who is the Illinois director of PIRG, as our expert for tonight. We're also going to be showcasing a study that was released in late January on the topic, and we'll put the link in the chat for you to have later so that you can get a little more depth on that. But the thing that's different tonight is we're going to start out with a short video. And this video was from a webinar that was done in late January, which involved Environment America, Illinois PIRG, and Frontier Group. So we're going to hear from a few of their experts first to kind of flesh out the issue. And then after that, we will break it open to our usual Night with the Experts format, where you'll have an opportunity to hear from our expert, Abe Scarr, and ask questions and get into dialogue. So bear with us. We're having some technical issues tonight. I hope to have those resolved pretty soon, and we will get started. There will be an occasional break in the video, so you have to also bear with us on that. So give me a moment and we'll get started here.
All right. It is 2:01, and out of respect for everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Johanna Newman. I'm the Senior Director of the Campaign for 100% Renewable Energy at Environment America. And Environment America is a research and policy organization whose sole mission is to protect our natural world. So we envision a better, greener America, one where all people and creatures can live healthy and enriching lives. And I'm really delighted to MC today's event. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll put a recording up on Environment America's YouTube channel as well as on our website. And I will send an email out to everyone who RSVP'd with a link to those resources so that you can share them afterwards if you feel inclined to do so. Our goals for today are really to educate attendees of this session about what data centers are, how widespread they are, and what impacts they're already having on our environment and on our energy system. And then we'll also talk about how data centers are projected to grow and what potential impacts that could have. And then we're excited to take your questions. So in terms of a plan, we're going to start by having our speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll open it up for a discussion that I will moderate. Then we'll open it up for a broader Q&A, and you can ask your questions by using the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. And then we'll wrap up the webinar at the end with just some follow-up resources. So that's our plan. To get things started, let's go to our first speaker. So Jeff, would you introduce yourself and how you came to reporting about data centers? And
Sure, thanks, Johanna. My name is Jeff St. John. Hello, everyone. I'm Director of News and Special Projects at Canary Media. We're a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to covering the climate crisis and clean energy transition. You can find us at www.canarymedia.com. And as a nonprofit, we welcome your support. And I've been an energy reporter for many years. Let's see if I think we're trying to count them, 16 and counting. Data centers were an area of focus for us at my old job when we were looking at how they could be better grid citizens, essentially. And the impact of data centers now with this enormous boom of AI is growing to the point where essentially it's going to be impossible for the US grid to absorb or to power all the data centers being proposed. And if something can't happen, it won't happen, right? But that doesn't mean that it can't cause damage on the way if utilities, regulators, policymakers, and citizens make rash decisions about not taking into account the effects that these data centers can have on the cost of power, the impacts on the environment, and keeping polluting generation online. So it's become a serious climate issue as well as an energy issue.
Hi, Stephanie.
And we're very interested in finding ways
Hello,
to report on that, as well as to find ways that folks who are building data centers can find ways to help, not harm these challenges, basically building as much clean power as they can, making sure that they interact with the grid and they don't drive up costs for people. So that's what we're working on.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Our next speaker is Quentin Good, who's a policy analyst at Frontier Group. So Quentin, can you talk a little bit about Frontier Group and what that is and the recent paper that came out today?
Yeah, thank you very much, Johanna, and thanks everyone for attending. My name is Quentin Good. As Johanna mentioned, I am a policy analyst with Frontier Group. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, and we work on issues of sustainability and the public interest. We're affiliated with Environment America and US PIRG and their state groups. We started working on this issue last year when it became clear that a rapid increase in demand for energy-intensive computing could really risk slowing down the transition to clean energy. And we developed a paper that came out today called Big Data Centers, Big Problems. And what we found in a nutshell, we'll go into some more detail, but the top line sort of findings was this surge in data centers and the projected increases over the next 10 years in the electricity demand for them is really already contributing to a slowdown in the transition to clean energy. And we also found that this is in particular a problem in areas with high concentrations of data centers like Virginia. We found 17 units at fossil fuel power plants that are at risk of having their closures delayed, and thousands of megawatts of new power plants that are being planned around the country that are powered by fossil fuels. And in many cases, the grid operators and utilities are citing data centers as one sector that is challenging the grid's resilience and that they're worried about maintaining the reliability from. So the concern is really that these projections of increasing demand for electricity for US data centers would continue to, put pressure on our energy system and increase our reliance on fossil fuels going forward. However, we also found that, projections of this increased demand are very uncertain. We don't have lots of data about how much energy and water these data centers use, and the projections vary widely. And what that really means is the outcome depends on policy, and the increase in demand is by no means inevitable. So we also feel that this is a problem that can be solved. And we can get into more details in the discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Quentin. Our next two speakers. Thank you for sharing your story, Cindy. All right, so now we're going to take down the slides and we're going to get into our discussion. So let's start with Jeff and Quentin. Can you just paint the picture, and for folks who are new to this, what is a data center and what is a cryptocurrency mine? All right.
Yeah. So a data center is a big building filled with stacks and rows of servers, which are computers that have advanced computing power. They have specialized processors that allow them to do all different kinds of computing. This can range from everything from data storage and retrieval to whenever you stream, use your streaming services to watch a movie or listen to music. They do big data analytics, and they also process generative AI queries in recent years. So whenever people ask a generative AI system to make them a poem or write them a song or help them with their homework or make a resume, all of that digital traffic is processed at data centers. And a crypto mine is very much like a data center in form, but not function. So it's a big building filled with servers and other auxiliary equipment that are performing computing functions. However, what those servers are doing is mining cryptocurrency. When we say mining cryptocurrency, I see we've got some questions in the chat about like, what is that? There are different ways to mine cryptocurrency, and essentially, they are all a decentralized method of verifying a crypto transaction and adding a block to what's called the blockchain. But again, there are different ways to do that. And when crypto companies add a block to the blockchain through whatever method that they're using, they're rewarded with the cryptocurrency. So that's them mining. And mining is really just a term of art. They add a block to the chain, they verify a transaction, and then they get crypto in return for what they've done. One of the more common methods for crypto mining is called proof of work. And this is the method that Bitcoin, the largest cryptocurrency, uses, and many others. The way that that works is miners essentially use their computers to solve very complex cryptographic puzzles, essentially through brute force by kind of trying to guess the answer until they finally stumble upon it. And when they do that, they add a block to the blockchain, and then they're rewarded with some cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin or a different type of coin. Over time, those cryptographic puzzles that they're solving need to become more complex and complicated, and they are sort of by design using up more and more electricity and becoming more energy, less energy efficient. And that's really a feature of proof of work crypto mining and not really a bug. There are other forms of crypto mining that use less electricity. However, they may have other issues as well that states should really consider whether or not it's worth doing.
I have
I
nothing
would like
to
to
add to
add,
that. Yeah,
oh,
go
go
ahead. I was going
I
to
was
say,
going to just add that another way that crypto mines differ, and I love Quentin's description of it, and just to add it maybe like someone who isn't a computer expert might understand, and this is how it really clicked for me, the wastefulness, is that every computer that is, quote, mining Bitcoin across the entire world is trying to guess that same cryptographic number or a string of different characters. Every single one of them is guessing the same number. And then only one wins. It happens about every 10 minutes. And then it all starts over again, 24/7, 365. So they're all wasting electricity to do the exact same guessing game. Number two is that you probably saw in my slides of the Harshaw Road crypto mine and some of the overhead shots that were in my slides. Crypto mines don't often go inside. So unlike a data center that has building standards and maybe even some concrete walls to protect not only their assets, but perhaps citizens from noise, crypto mines are in what looks like a shipping container. They call them miner boxes, and they will put hundreds of computers in just one, and the noise is horrific. So this is where the noise pollution differential between a data center and a crypto mine is pretty substantial. Thank you.
I have nothing to add to what you guys said. You know a lot more about it than I do, to be sure. I will just add that some perspective on the amount of power that we're talking about. You know, kind of data centers in the old days used to be maybe 10, 20 gigawatts. And let's remember, a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. 1 megawatt can power between about 400 or 900 homes. So multiply that by, 1,000, and then start multiplying by the number of megawatts we're talking about. So from 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts, Now we're talking about 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt. The announcement made yesterday by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank with President Trump about a supercomputer complex they've dubbed Stargate is talking about $100 billion investment for 5 gigawatts of supercomputing. And estimates of the total demand for data centers in this country ranges anywhere from 20 to 30 gigawatts to upward of 120, 130, 150 gigawatts. At the low end, that could be increasing capacity or the use of electricity by data centers writ large, all the different kinds, from about 4% of the country's power needs to about 8%. It could go as high as 12, 15%. It's all very speculative, uncertain, but it's a lot of power.
That's really helpful to hear. And then, Jeff, can you just talk a little bit more about the trajectory of these facilities? So, how many have there historically been? How many are there now? And what are the potential impacts on our electric grid and beyond?
Yeah, well, here's the data. The Electric Power Research Institute, that's a kind of a research org funded mainly by utilities, has about 2,700 data centers, and that excludes cryptocurrency mines because they're not quite kind of tracked in the same way. And that was in 2021. It's doubled as of March 2024. It was using about, like I said, 4% of total US electricity consumption in 2023. That's about 14 million households. And EPRI, this research org, says it could increase to 5% to 11% of total electricity consumption in the US by 2030. Now, EPRI is using more rational growth figures. There are some irrational growth figures that you can compile by, say, taking every tech company's kind of state or private property developer statement about what they're going to build and adding them all up, or taking every utility's load forecast, all the projects that say they want to plug in someday, and that'll be way bigger. But it's getting to the point that, especially in the places where there are already a lot of data centers, in Virginia, in Texas, in Georgia, around Atlanta, in certainly the San Francisco Bay Area, the amount of data centers seeking interconnection, at least putatively, is essentially impossible to plug in. And what data centers can do is get online real fast. If you're going to build a factory, it's going to take 5 years. Subdivision, similar. Data centers could theoretically be up and running in a year or two. So right now, the big barrier to data center developers getting built is not money, is not land, is not access to the fiber optic cables they need to move data. It is what they call time to power. And this is an important point for, I think, people who are concerned about this to take into consideration. The regulators who determine the rules by which new loads, that is, customers of the power grid, get interconnected, and the utilities that tell you how much load they can take before it starts to imperil grid reliability or present the risk of driving up costs for everyone else who pays for all the stuff that utilities would build to handle it, is an important gating factor here.
Great, appreciate that. I want to backtrack a little bit. There are some questions just basic, what is Bitcoin? Is there someone here who can take a second and just explain cryptocurrencies and what they are and their potential merits and drawbacks?
I am not a financial expert, and I do not claim to be one. And I didn't know if Quentin wanted to take a stab at it, and then maybe I could add to it. But I know my version of it, but I'm hoping someone else might have more of a background than I.
Yeah, so a Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency is a virtual currency, and it is monitored the amount of cryptocurrency that anyone owns is monitored on a decentralized ledger that's called the blockchain. So essentially, the blockchain just keeps track of how much of each Bitcoin any one person or entity owns. And they can use that currency, quote unquote currency, to exchange for other fiat currencies, which are actual money. They can use it in some cases to buy things for any company that happens to accept that type of cryptocurrency for a good or service. Or they can just kind of keep it in whatever account they have on their crypto exchange. So it's a virtual currency that's a little bit different from money, and the amount that anyone owns is monitored through this virtual ledger through some sort of decentralized method, such as proof of work. I hope that wasn't too technical.
I think it was perfect. And I just have a few facts that we have researched at the National Coalition Against Crypto Mining, and to think about this virtual currency. And the big behemoth is Bitcoin. That's the one most of us have heard of, is because they have the largest market share. But the Federal Reserve, some people call it the Fed, here in Atlanta did a survey in October of 2023 and asked the survey participants if they have used cryptocurrency to pay a bill or to make a transaction, meaning buy something, in the last 30 days. And 99.6% of people said no. So there's the 0.4% who are avid users that, from looking at the media, you'd think it's like millions and millions of people. The other quick fact that I'd like to share is that over 90% of the Bitcoin is only in the top 1% of the wallets. So what does that mean? That means that mostly big companies own most of the Bitcoin, not individual people. Avid users that, from looking at the media, you'd think it's like millions and millions of people. The other quick fact that I'd like to share is that over 90% of the Bitcoin is only in the top 1% of the wallets. So what does that mean? That means that mostly big companies own most of the Bitcoin, not individual people. So I just wanted to share those quick facts with the audience.
Appreciate it, Cindy. All right. I'm looking at the clock. We have 20 minutes left. I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time talking about what can be done. So Quentin, Jeff, can you lay out some big picture policies that can be used to curb the problem?
Yeah, Quentin, go for it. You've got them all written down.
Yeah. So one of the first policies that we're advocating for is to require data centers to power all of their operations with virtually all renewable energy. So investing in renewable energy credits, trying to build new renewable energy generating sources on site so that they don't have to take renewable energy off the grid to power their operations. Another thing that we would like to see is better reporting on the amount of energy and water that data centers are using. I mentioned earlier that all the projections are pretty uncertain, and that has a lot to do with the fact that data centers simply aren't reporting how much electricity they use, and so those calculations are sort of being calculated from the ground up based on how many computers they have and the type of equipment that they're using. And that leads to a lot of uncertainty, and it also makes it harder for grid operators, for utilities, for states to plan and put in place policies that make sense for data center growth. So better reporting would be a key step, and that would also enable us to establish efficiency standards. We can't hold data centers to an efficiency standard if we don't know how efficient they are. I mentioned that we should incentivize data centers to build new clean energy generating capacity, and really as much as they can build on site would be better, because if they're taking clean energy or any other type of energy, even nuclear, off the grid to power themselves directly, that can have a major impact on other utility customers that are being served by that. We think that data centers should be required to pay the full cost of service and pay for the upgrades that are needed to the grid that they cause, rather than other ratepayers having to be saddled with the bill for data centers. And we also think that states should consider moratoria on proof of work crypto mining, which we know is a big energy suck. Lastly, it makes sense to have data centers be required to enter into long-term service agreements, because if a data center moves into a community, causes the grid operator or utilities to have to invest in new infrastructure and then moves out, that is going to leave those costs with the utility customers in that area. So requiring those long-term service agreements and requiring them to pay a termination fee if they exit the service area early. Those are a few of the policies that, states and nationally we could consider. And then corporate policies, we feel that tech companies should commit to powering their data centers with 100% clean energy and stick to those commitments. And yeah, there are a few other solutions that are a little bit more technical, but I think those are the big picture policies that would really help.
And Quentin, are those outlined in the white paper?
They are.
Great.
Yeah.
I might jump in with a couple of examples of where folks are working on that kind of stuff real quick. I know that in Virginia, there was a bipartisan group of state lawmakers who last month introduced a slew of bills that would set some requirements for data centers in what is now, in Northern Virginia, the country's or the world's most dense data center hub. And those include giving local governments power to review noise, water, kind of land use impacts of data centers, requiring that data centers improve energy efficiency, mandating quarterly reports at least of water and energy consumption, and ordering state regulators to study whether the utility costs driven by meeting data center load growth, growth of power demand, are in fact being disproportionately borne by other customers. Because remember, utilities make money when they build stuff on a guaranteed rate of return, and those costs go on to customers' bills in the form of increased rates. There's an important kind of equity issue here that regulators need to be aware of. There's also the question of it's difficult to get new clean power onto the grid in many parts of the country. A lot of the power grids around the country, they have these interconnection bottlenecks. They just can't figure out how to get all the new wind and solar power interconnected. But there's also the question of, well, if you can't get the power to the data center, why not move the data center to the power? And that's an interesting prospect. There are a lot of data centers going up in places that are a bit more remote from the big traditional hubs, but are in that kind of wind and sun belt part of the country, up through the Midwest from Texas to North Dakota and out into the Southwest. And there's an example that Google put together with a company called Intersect Power and a private equity firm that's looking at 20 billion into data centers that are basically built at the same time that they're building a bunch of wind, solar, and batteries to power them. And the idea is if you can kind of do that planning together, you can maybe work around those problems that are making it hard for data centers in one place to get interconnected to the grid and the wind and the solar power in some other place to get interconnected to the grid. And that also helps kind of make sure you're aligning and properly accounting for what's going on. I think an interesting counterexample is down in Louisiana where Meta, the parent company of Facebook, recently announced a $10 billion plan to develop a data center that is simultaneous with the Louisiana utility Entergy's request to regulators to spend $3.2 billion to build 1,500 megawatts of new gas-fired power. And the plan says that Facebook's going to guarantee to buy that power for 15 years. It's going to seek out an equivalent amount of solar power through partnership with the utility, and that it will eventually find other clean resources. But it's not clear that the stuff that Facebook and Entergy say they're going to do to clean that gas-fired power, like switch it to green hydrogen is really a practical solution. And for the consumer advocates down there, they're worried about what happens when that 15-year power purchase agreement with Facebook ends, because these gas plants last 30 or 40 years or more. Who's going to pay for that power if Facebook begs out after that? So there's a lot of complexities here to work through.
All right. I propose we move on to the Q&A section.
All right. And I also propose that we move on to the Q&A section. And thank you for your patience. We hope that the audio and the video came out okay for those of you who were there. As they mentioned, the report's name is Big Data Centers, Big Problems. And we will put a link in the chat tonight, so you'll be able to take a look at this report. It's about 33 pages long, very well put together, well organized, very understandable. And for those of you who love footnotes, there are 179 of them. So you'll have lots of fun looking at the fine print. I am really pleased and grateful to be able to introduce to you tonight Abe Scarr. He's been a colleague in the environmental trenches for many, many years, and he's the director of the Illinois PIRG organization here. One of the most recent issues that he and PIRG and others have worked on, but Abe has really been the prime mover to get this movement going, was the opposition to the excessive expenditures from the People's Gas project of putting in new lines. I'll let him talk about that in more detail if he so chooses. But tonight, we certainly want to give him the opportunity to talk about the study, because he was a co-author of this study, and other issues that do relate to the use of AI, cryptocurrency, data centers, and its effect on the grid. And in particular, will there be an implication that it will help grow nuclear power and keep fossil fuels online longer? So that's kind of the thrust of where we're heading. I'm going to get Abe up here, and we will turn it loose on him, and then we'll have our usual format at the end when he's done with his remarks. So give me a moment here, and we'll get him. Let's see. There we go. All right, and I will get rid of myself if I can here. I'm not a totally good person on Zoom yet. All right, Abe, why don't you just take it away until I'm
okay. And you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Abe Scarr. I'm the director for Illinois PIRG. I also play a national role with our organization with US PIRG as the Energy and Utilities Program Director. That's how I got to be a co-author on the report, I should say. Quentin really wrote the report, who you heard from. Was more of an advisor and editor, but get to put my name on it. So I think all the kind of key things I would want to say were covered already, but I'll just make a few points to highlight and then look forward to the conversation. I think one of the key things that we wanted to communicate in the report, and that I'm certainly trying to communicate to policymakers here in Illinois, is that this massive build out of data centers is in no way inevitable, and we should not treat it as such. And in fact should start doing more to slow the growth. One thing that's in our report that wasn't what you just heard was that Illinois has been giving tax credits to data centers. 468 million between 2019 and 2023 of our tax dollars went to support data center build out. And in 2024, that number grew in just 1 year to 370 million as the data center boom started to take off. So one simple thing, for example, that we could do is stop using our tax dollars to subsidize what's clearly a booming industry on its own. And it's frustrating being in the policy world when everybody does act like, well, of course, like we have no control, like there's some invisible hand mandating that we build out all these data centers, when we, of course, through our government, can make decisions about such things. The second, as I think Quentin did a good job of doing, talking about, that their data centers are causing concrete harms already, whether it's the keeping coal plants online longer, delaying the transition or the adoption of more clean energy, We're seeing certainly a big rush to gas in many places. In a gas utility rate filing here in Illinois this year, they're talking about the reasons why we can't electrify our buildings because there's just not enough electricity because the demand for data centers, therefore we're going to have to keep burning gas in our homes and push off that transition as well. So it's causing problems right now. And then those harms are for speculative benefits. I want to be very clear that, organizationally, we think there's great promise in technology, and we think we should celebrate when technology makes it so that we can get tasks done that used to take human toil and can free us from that to pursue other pursuits. And there's certainly great promise in AI and computing technology. So we don't want to come off and as just like anti technology or anti, the benefits that can come from that. But I think there's a very strong argument that the benefits of generative AI, what we're talking about here is one type of AI. There are large language models that are essentially guessing what word is going to come after the next word using probability. Haven't really shown that there's incredible use case for all this. They talk about what's possible in the future, and they talk about, Sam Altman from OpenAI was going to Congress a couple of years ago to say our technology is so powerful it could end the world, and so we have to regulate it. Which sounds like kind of weird that somebody would talk about how dangerous their product is, but that's a way of talking about how powerful it is and telling the story about how powerful it is that so far they've demonstrated is not the case after spending literally hundreds of billions of dollars invested in this technology. And I'll come to my final couple points and then we can wrap up. But I do think I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I think there's a lot of reasons to believe some of the reasons I was just going over, that we have an AI bubble right now, that there's been a lot of money poured in, a lot of money continue to be poured in. A lot of people want to continue to pour money into it so they can profit off of that. But that very likely at some point the bottom's going to fall out. And we saw this, the people may have heard of DeepSeek, this Chinese technology. It was announced a couple of days after our report release, but basically can match what the biggest AI companies in America like OpenAI are doing. And they did it for much, much less money and using much, much less energy and compute power. And so I think, again, there's lots of reason to believe that at any moment the bottom could fall out. And if we have already invested or already planned to, again, delay coal plant closures, build new gas plants, we could be stuck with a big bill in our hands with nothing to show for it. So then the last thing I'd say, there's a little bit of this in our report. Actually, if you do read the intro, we harken back, I think, to the 70s, and there's charts about all the predictions of the ever-growing energy demand, which kept showing not to be true. And, I think a lot of folks in this group will know the history well, that here in Illinois, ComEd, when it owned the power plants and built the power plants, overbuilt the nuclear plants. They built much more capacity than was needed, based on this idea that we were going to need all this power, and they overbuilt, and that almost wrecked ComEd at the time. It created some of the highest energy bills here in the country. It led to ComEd underinvesting in its distribution network and having terrible reliability for a couple decades. That was only solved after they got involved in a bribery scandal and got themselves super profits in order to finally fix their grid. And of course, now we've bailed out the nuke plants here in Illinois several times over, all from an overinvestment from the expectation we were going to use more power than we actually needed back in the 80s and early 90s. So I think there's certainly some, not only as Dave was saying earlier, we've talked about that there's some people are talking about reviving nuclear plants or keeping them alive. I think the situation we're in is very similar to a situation we've been in the past. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Abe. We are going to be joined now by my friend and colleague and also my boss, Jan Boudart, who is on the board of NEIS. Jan moderates the next portion of the evening, and this is an opportunity for you who are attending to have some conversation with Abe, ask questions, get into some dialogue. There may be some additional information some of us will throw in, and she'll give you the lowdown on how the next portion of the meeting will run. So I will go on mute and turn it over to Jan. Thank you for joining. And
Thank
Abe,
you.
thank you for that the remarks.
Thank you all for coming. And it's really beautiful to see so many in here. Is everybody getting an echo? Am I the only one getting an echo?
I do not hear an echo, Jan, on my end.
Okay.
All right.
I don't know how I can ignore it. Just a minute. You can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Turn down your sound.
okay. Oh, yeah, I had it very loud. Okay, so I'm not getting an echo anymore. Each person gets one question and a follow-up question when they raise their hand. And if you're making a comment or you have a long question or don't need feedback, I will time you at 3 minutes. Please don't ask a series of questions, one at a time. And how to get into the stack. Go to the chat and say in the chat stack, or you can go to the bottom where it says React, and it's a little heart, and if you click on that, there will be a thing where you can raise your hand. That's the best way, because then we see you immediately with your hand raised. I already see Connie and Jill. Okay, so you will get a second chance to raise a question if it is not before 1:30 and no one else has their hand raised. So let's start with Connie. She was first to get her hand up. And so Connie, please ask your question.
As usual, thank you so much for a great presentation. What I know about this, you could put on the head of a pin and have plenty of room to dance. So, but my question is, PJM, the grid operator, for example, just recently, or FERC actually approved PJM to fast track, I think it's 51, what they call shovel-ready projects, none of which are renewable. Some are supposedly nuclear, according to one article. I don't know what nuclear projects other than restarts are shovel ready, but my question is, and there's a huge backlog in PJM. I can't speak to any of the other grid operators, but there's, as Dave knows, he's done research on this, a huge backlog, an admitted backlog. Both FERC and PJM admit that there's a backlog of renewable energy waiting to get into the grid. My question is, these grid operators are so autonomous and independent. What recourse does the public have for criticizing won't do it, but fighting? What, if any, recourse is there to fight the decisions made by either FERC or the grid operators themselves, short of possible lawsuits, for example?
Thanks for the question, Connie. And I'll just add a little bit more context just in case. I think you did a good job of explaining the basics here, but Northern Illinois is part of PJM. It's mostly actually mid-Atlantic states were kind of tied into it. And it's it's responsible for interstate transmission. So Not every state produces all the power they need. Some states like Illinois export power to other states. So PJM handles that, as well as one of the key things they are responsible for is just making sure that all the grids in their region are able to meet peak demand at the times, typically in summer when everybody has their air conditioning on or industries running, that there's enough power for the entire grid to meet that peak demand. And PJM is, I think, the worst of the regional organizations, both in terms of the decision making and in terms of this backlog that they've had of interconnecting, bringing new renewable programs online. And that's largely because their structure is largely dominated by incumbent utilities and power plant owners. And so they have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. And even though there's been renewables in line for 5 years to be connected, they're now allowing gas plants and potentially nuclear plants to skip the line. As I understand it, it doesn't say anything like this. They don't say gas plants can skip the line. They're like talking about a resource that can do this and that and the other thing that basically only describes like a big fossil fuel plant or a big nuke plant and would not describe like an industrial scale solar farm. And so that's why I think maybe they mentioned nukes because they could kind of fit the rules. To answer your question then, it's really hard. I've been thinking about this. I've avoided thinking about this for a long time because it's such a hard question and I didn't want to get dragged into it, but I think we're inevitably getting dragged into it because it's such a big problem. The thing we've seen that's worked recently was that the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, filed a complaint with FERC, made a lot of noise about it, threatened to leave PJM, which was headquartered in Pennsylvania and started in Pennsylvania, and kind of used the bully pulpit, and a number of other governors, including Governor Pritzker, signed on and supported. And they eventually reached a settlement, which is not perfect and doesn't solve the long-term problems, but according to the governor, will save consumers $21 billion over the next couple of years, which is nothing to sneeze at. And I think that's right now what I and some other folks who work on this are thinking is that we need to get governors to step up and use the bully pulpit. And eventually, I think we're going to need to change the governance structure. So long as the incumbents control it and they have their own incentives, they're going to use it to their ends.
Thank you for that answer, Abe. Are you happy, Connie? Did that get to you? Oh, okay. So our next questioner is Jill Murphy Long, and she put her question in the chat also. So Jill, thank you for the question and go ahead and ask it.
Okay, hi. Thanks. Abe, I was just curious what your take is on Bill Gates. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm a 3 Mile Island survivor, brain tumor and thyroid cancer as of last year.
Gosh.
And I know more than 5,000 people in the four counties surrounding 3 Mile Island that are very sick. And now it's affecting the second and third generation. So how do we stop Bill Gates? And I live currently now in Portland, Oregon, and we have Jeff Bozo, as I call him, trying to open up small reactors or whatever he's doing with nuclear up in Hanford. So it's just it's not good. So I was just curious if you any strategies or ideas on how we can work together as a community to stop this.
Well, thank you for your question and sharing your experience, and I'm sorry to hear that. Am I correct? Is it Bill Gates now cuddly philanthropist, or that's how he presents himself, even though he was a monopolist for many years? Or is it Microsoft that was talking about it? Because I think if I remember correctly, it was Microsoft. And
yeah, Microsoft is the one that's trying to come in at 3 Mile Island.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I don't have all the details down, but I believe Microsoft actually just made an announcement within the last couple days that they're pulling back from not this project per se. I wish I had that news to share, but that from a lot of their commitments or a lot of what they had said they were going to do in terms of building out more data centers. So I think that's another kind of sign that the inevitable narrative that's been surrounding this for the last year or couple of years may be faltering a little bit. but I think it's a hard question about how to stop it. I think one of the things, and what we tried to do with this report, and what I would encourage you to do, is to just tell a different story. I think the AI boom is, again, I don't think the technology has demonstrated that it's as revolutionary as they say. But they've got this powerful narrative. They've got this story that a lot of people are invested in. And I don't think a lot of people have heard an alternative story that it's not inevitable, that this technology has yet to demonstrate that it's world changing, and that we should at a minimum, put the brakes on slowdown. And then, I'd be happy to talk further if there's any insights in Pennsylvania. I don't work there, but I have colleagues who do, and it may be a longer conversation offline, but happy to talk further.
Okay, I hope that answer satisfies you, Jill, and I think it was very good. Kristen Schrader-Frechette wants to say, but you could do it yourself, Kristen. I was just going to read what you put in the chat.
Okay, yeah, my point is, I don't disagree with a lot of what people have said, although I think it's very difficult to predict whether a technology is going to be good or bad ahead of time. There's a long list of scientists who said things couldn't be done or wouldn't be useful, et cetera, and they've all been proved wrong. So that's really difficult because you have no empirical grounds really for doing that. But here's my worry. We've always treated electricity as a market commodity. If you can pay for it, you can have it. So how do you answer the obvious objection of total free market proponents that if these guys can pay for it, they can have it? It sounds as if, listening to Abe and some of you, that what you're really saying is these guys aren't paying the entire cost of the electricity that they want to use because their uses are so monumental. Now, if that's the argument, then I think it's better to lead with that argument instead of saying we're going to be the judge of who can buy commodities on the market, because that's a no-win argument given the world we live in. We might not want to live in that world, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And usually the people who make those market arguments are not telling the truth for the precise reason that they never carry their own cost.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody could address that.
Yeah, Abe, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I do think that part of the argument for sure is that there's a lot of evidence in many places that they're not paying their full costs. And then, when you come to things like this, it's not only are they paying their full costs now, but what are the risks involved? Because when we build a power plant typically, or build a utility, there's an implicit guarantee that over time the public is going to pay for it back in many of these cases. And so it's not only about who's paying now, but what are the long-term risks and how are those risks allocated in society? And a lot of them we see are consistently put onto utility customers in the public in ways that I think are not justified. And then to the free market, I just think I take your point, but I also think when it comes to utilities, we're not talking about a free market. These are state-granted monopolies that are there to serve the public interest. And so we can and do exercise great control over the, how we build and our electrical grid and our resources. And it's totally appropriate to set guardrails. I don't think anybody is saying ban data centers, ban generative AI. That's certainly not what we're saying. And so it's not even kind of the argument we're making. The argument is slow down and don't overbuild in particular, while it's still very uncertain whether this boom is going to continue or bust, and when we're not sure what the benefits are, and while we do know that there's significant costs.
Okay, I'm going to ask Dave to ask his question, and then I'd like the person who's calling herself Kathleen Rude, but is actually Jackie Dreschler, if she would kind of formulate a question to ask after Dave. But go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thanks. Two-parter here, Abe, and you've been around the block a long time. I'm not going to try and get you in trouble on some of this, but we'll see where it goes. I've been notoriously a glass half broken person most of my life dealing with environmental stuff. And particularly with the nuclear situation, I'm glad in your remarks early on, you touched on a little bit of the history, and it also mentions it in the report that utilities overbuilt because they assumed there was going to be a 7 to 8% annual growth rate. And when that failed to materialize, all those who poured their money into nuclear plants either didn't finish them or went bankrupt. Now, the last 4 years of the Biden administration has been nothing but a cash cow for the nuclear industry, both politically and financially. And on every front, money is thrown in their direction, which gives the message that we're not going to let nuclear fail no matter what. Just today, I put a link in the chat here. There was an article that Standard & Poor's did about the Illinois situation. Our utility, Constellation Power, owns all of the 11 operating reactors here. And when I look at the rush to build, whether it's small modulars, because you can get a lot of DOE grants and milk the system that way, or excuses to keep old reactors online like we have here in Illinois, or resurrect the zombie ones like they have at Palisades in Michigan and 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. I get a little suspicious about this projection of energy need, especially after the Chinese announcement. Now, we don't know if that's legitimate or not, but I did see other articles that say simply changing some of the code that is used on data centers can significantly reduce energy need, legitimate energy need, I should say. So what all that is a question leading up to is, we just concluded the corruption scandal of Madigan here in Illinois. Connie Klein's from Ohio, where they are doing all they can to overtake us for corruption. And earlier in the year in South Carolina, there was a utility executive who pled guilty to a $9 billion fraud case relating to nuclear. My nefarious question is this a Ponzi scheme, a self-fulfilling prophecy setup where you cry wolf that you need all this energy and then you can justify all of this building? So that's just a speculation. I have no proof of this, but we certainly have history as a guide of what happens when it goes south. So I don't know if you want to speculate on that.
Sure. Yeah, similarly, can't say it with any degree of certainty, but I think there is a lot of evidence that this is a hype cycle, that a lot of this is driven by the big tech companies, thinking about Microsoft and Google, who are some of the big investors in this technology, who are building the data centers and doing the cloud computing hosting for a lot of these, that they've had a good run and been able to make incredible returns excuse me, for their investors for some time. And the kind of expectations we've set around the market generally and tech stocks is that there's always going to be growth and they're always going to be the next thing, and that this has been the next thing. And to the DeepSeek question, and they've all the kind of American AI companies have kind of been making the case that the way we are going to win the AI race, and kind of have a monopolistic, try to get the technology before anybody else has it and control it, is by just using ever more money, pouring in ever more energy, ever more money, and that's the way that we're going to do it. And I think DeepSeek, yes, there's some possibility that it's not is quite as cheap, or maybe they had some of the GPU chips that they didn't have the most up-to-date chips. Maybe they had more than we thought. Even still, it undermines that entire business model and approach. So I can't predict the future, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I'm also relatively convinced that this is more of a story than a technology, and that a lot of people are very invested in it because whether it's the people running these companies or the fossil fuel generators, there's an opportunity to make a buck, and a big opportunity, and they're going after it.
I have a second part, but I see we have other people asking questions, so I'll get at the end of the line and come back to you. Thanks.
Okay, Jackie, can you put your comments into a question, or should I
Sure.
just give you 3 minutes to make a comment?
Sure. So first of all, I do see that Jill Murphy has a question about, do SMRs create less toxic waste or less radioactive waste? And from what I've been able to glean, no, they do not create less waste. They actually create more highly reactive radioactive waste. So maybe Michelle, if she's on here, she could speak to that, or someone else could. But what I wanted to talk about was actually several things here. One is the water usage for data centers. Yes, David Kraft is writing in the comment how much more per kilowatt waste is produced, and it's more highly radioactive. So I'm very concerned about water use. We're coming into water wars because we don't have enough clean, pure water, and this is what's used to cool down these massive warehouses or football field sized warehouses for these centers. So I have a big concern about that. I don't know if anyone can talk a little bit more about that. I know that where I live, there is a data center. Supposedly they recycle the water, but now we have 2 more requests for 2 more data centers, 1 or 2 more data centers here in Rockland, which is really terrifying because we're in a unique position of only having a finite amount of water that is within our borders to use. So that was another issue about the water. And then, this whole concept that there's renewable energy out there that could be put into the grid that is being stopped from being put into the grid. And we know that FERC makes very bad decisions. I personally was a disruptor at a FERC hearing regarding LNGs. They've been court ordered to not continuing to say yes to LNGs. And I ended up being a disruptor at a hearing in Washington. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can do. Legislation is a lot better. So the fact is we need to get the real renewable energy into the grid. Here in New York State and in other places, nuclear power plant energy is being considered renewable energy. Obviously, they say there's no carbon footprint, but we know that it is not renewable. So we just have a big problem with that. And we have a problem with the utilities having this massive control over energy, which is supposed to be for the public good, for citizens to be able to use responsibly. And God knows we have to use it responsibly because it's so expensive. So that's a big question. Here in New York, we have Indian Point, which is being decommissioned. And at the latest decommissioning oversight board hearing, it slipped out that they had actually put in a request to the independent operators for 200 megawatts of energy because they might want to put something there. Who knows? I mean, 200 megawatts doesn't sound like a whole lot, but that's just the beginning, right? And so
You've only got 20 seconds left yet, Jackie.
Okay, so I mean, obviously I have these concerns, but really to do with water, really to do with the energy that's so privatized that we can't afford it, that's supposed to be for the public good. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Jackie. And I can't speak too much more about the water, unfortunately. It's not something that I've been as focused on, but I just highlighted and put in the chat from our report that just one data center can consume as much as 5 million gallons of water daily. And it's both from the cooling but also from the power generation. So it is absolutely a significant problem, especially as you note, good clean water is becoming more scarce and contested.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Kathy Barnes, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, a couple things. I really can't comprehend why this country is doing alternative energy the way it's doing it, which is like corporate big projects, big subsidies, where they could have, like in Bangladesh, they have what they call a microgrid, and everybody has a solar panel on their rooftop, which goes into like a battery bank for the community. And then you can put in, take out, you can donate electricity. Like if it's going to be gone for a while and you don't need it, you can donate it for the greater good. And this works really good for people, and they're very liberated. Everybody has a little like switch in their house, a little meter thing. They can switch incoming or outgoing energy from their panels. And they all work together, and they're getting like basically free energy and sometimes even make money off of it. We could do that instead of all this craziness where where I live, they're carpeting productive farmland with solar panels, miles and miles and miles of it. And then they're going to be hacking down forests to compensate for the lost ground. So it's not really environmental when they're taking trees down, which is really a green thing. So that's one issue I have, is why are they doing it the way they're doing it? Another thing, I have a question. I didn't know about those big data centers. You call them crypto banks or something. And you're saying that they are so powerful with electricity that it's all humming and all this and that. Well, what I'm concerned about is, where are these things? I've never seen one. Are they in an area that's going to affect people with electromagnetic frequency, high voltage power waves, etc., that could destabilize people's physiology and cause cancers? Is there any warning signs to know that these things exist? And like, why? I can't comprehend why this thing is even going on. So anyway, I was just wondering, are there any protections against this stuff?
Thank you. Both are big questions with, I don't think I have short, snappy answers for. I think I'll try with the first of why renewable energy in America tends to be more utility scale and less distributed, although there's been a lot of success in many states in building out significant distributed, as in like rooftop and community solar. And I think the biggest reason is the incumbent utilities, that they don't like to have to interconnect, and they don't like that they're losing the customers, and there's distribution value. So it's not only about generating the electrons and sending electrons back and forth, but for the electrical utility, even if they have nothing to do, like here in Illinois, ComEd does not generate the electrons. That's not their business model. It's all about the wires. But if people are generating their own electricity, for a lot of the time, you don't need to build as many wires. And their business model is to build more wires, to build more substations, to repair and et cetera. So it's been a threat to the utility business model, and they've fought it vigorously here and across the country, and continue to do so. Again, I think there's certainly more to it, but that to me, based on my understanding, is the biggest thing. I don't have too much I think I can share about like how to know where these crypto mines are. I think often they've been in more rural areas, less from densely populated areas, but I think as they become more and more data centers and crypto mines, they're starting to encroach. And I don't know anything about the electromagnetic or other harms from them, but certainly there are noise issues that I'm aware of, very loud. And then power quality. So because they're putting such a strain on the local grid, it's going to mean that whether it's reliability or, if your lights flicker sometimes because the voltage is kind of going up and down slightly, that you can increase the problems with the quality of the power in the area.
Thank you, Abe. Michelle, do you want me to give you time for a comment, or do you just have a question?
I guess comment.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
guess I think the real question is, can you predict the future? Because I think one thing we're also snarled up in cognitively is that at every single domain that connects to this topic, there's uncertainty, like getting into technological level and the economic level and political level, the legal level, like gut. And to a large degree also the geopolitical level. So I wanted to thank you so much for doing this report, because the fights, the only battleground that's, I think, winnable in the near future is going to be at the state and local level. And we're certainly fighting it now in New York. And of course, it's data centers. Our governor, Catherine Hochul, is very excited about bringing thousands of jobs and everything else to New York. And of course, powered by nuclear. But it's also, she's up for election in a year, and that people do have an input at the state level. So thank you. I would just throw in two thoughts on fast. One is that, let's say the AI is as fantastical as claimed. If that's the logic, they should not only be able to make themselves far more efficient using, this incredible brain power that's never existed before in the universe, but also be able to help, other, and this is where I think there's actually some validity, in areas such as design, building design, roads, creating less congestion on roads. There are areas where AI is already shown to be very helpful in terms of logistical, adding logistical brain power. So, I think if we're going to be arguing, not just naysaying, we have to bring those things up and basically demand that this very, very, very richer than God industry pay its own way. If they believe this, put their own money up.
Okay, Michelle still had 30 seconds, but I guess she's finished.
Oh, no, you did that. Okay,
That's never happened before.
Yeah, okay, well, I didn't realize that.
Okay.
My 10 seconds I'll do. There's going to be huge security risks that are unassessed. And that's also something we have to keep an eye on, particularly when you add in cybersecurity and, future warfare and the world.
And Stephanie's got her thumbs up on that one. Do you want to make any comment at this point, Abe?
I'll try to make one very short one, just that I believe I said this earlier, but I want to reinforce that yes, there's great promises with technology, including large language models, the generative AI we've mostly been talking about. But one of the questions is it a multi-trillion-dollar industry that they're building it up to, or is it actually have a much smaller, very important, but niche application that doesn't justify all of this incredible investment and all these societal harms? I think that's more likely what it is, that there's some really great applications. People should use it for it. That's great, but it's not necessarily something where there's ever going to be a return on investment for the trillions that are going into it.
Okay, now Stephanie has a question. I can read it from the chat if that's what you prefer, Stephanie. It's really concise. Okay, it was mentioned that data centers were going gangbusters in Virginia, DC, Texas, and Atlanta. Why is it drawn to those locations?
That is a good question, and I don't think I can give a firm answer. I think it's been availability of power, generating capacity in the local grid, and then state, state policies that have incentivized it. Illinois is among the places we're actually up there. And as I said earlier, that's in part because we've been shoveling hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to call on Evan. Sorry, Dave, but he hasn't had a question yet. Evan, go ahead, please. You've got to unmute, Evan. We can't hear you. Was your question?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
so the company I work for is trying hard to be more sustainable, and they're putting up renewable energy on their production facilities. It's a global company. And they're tracking their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And but at the same time, they're gung-ho on AI. And so I'm wondering, are there AI server providers that are using 100% renewable energy? And I guess behind that is the question, is that is computing service being accounted for as a scope 1, 2, or 3 emission source for CO2?
I definitely don't know the answer to your second part of the question, unfortunately. Sorry. On the first question, not to my knowledge. I think, what we have seen is companies like Microsoft who have had pledges about cleaning their power usage, backtracking on those because they've decided it's more important that they build out these data centers and consume massive amounts of electricity. I could be wrong. There could be something that I don't know about, but I think certainly the general trend is in the wrong direction.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
okay. I wonder if Connie, would you kind of prepare a little talk on Anduril and its use of AI for weapons production? Or you could put in the chat Jason Sally's analysis of it. Could you pull that up, or am I asking too much?
I don't know if I can, I can send it to you guys after the meeting. I don't know, but he's provided a lot of analysis, but basically you just summarized it. It's AI controlled weaponry. We have no idea whether it's nuclear. Some of our weaponry now is AI controlled. So it's not that new, but that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Dave, go ahead and ask your second question.
Okay, thanks. Our audience tonight is pretty much national in scope, but I'm gonna be a little parochial. And again, I'm not gonna try and get you in trouble on this one, Abe, but you work a lot downstate at the Capitol in Springfield. And as we move into this session this year, what is your read of the legislators that you come in contact with, or even the governor's office, in terms of how they're proceeding in dealing with this issue, both of expanded data centers, but also what goes along with it, which is the strain on the grid and the need for production of more power? What is your political read on those, if you could?
Well, I'll have more to say soon. I actually was just invited. The House Energy Environment Committee has a subcommittee on this, and we're having a hearing Tuesday at 4. So that should give me better insight. But they've already did a subject matter hearing in the full House and Energy Environment Committee, and I know this was a big topic of conversation. So all I can say so far is that decision makers are aware of the challenge, or again, the expected challenge of this idea that data centers are just going to grow inevitably, and it's going to put a strain on our grid. I think I anticipate that we are going to continue to be somewhat of a lonely voice and just trying to question the underlying premises rather than, and we have some of these recommendations in our report too, like we should make them as efficient as possible and source them with renewable energy. And to the extent we are going to have these, and we are going to have some, I mean, our Zoom call is also empowered by cloud computing and data centers and to an extent. So, we have to appreciate that and understand that. We should make them as efficient as possible. I think that's where people tend to have the conversation. And what I'll be trying to do is bring the conversation back more to, just question the assumptions, question that this is inevitable, that we have to do it. We have to kind of solve the problem rather than prevent the problem. We'll see how that goes. I think everybody, so typical in politics in general, not just an Illinois thing, that people are just bought into, we have to keep growing and growing, and these data centers will bring construction jobs, and that's good, and that's just the mindset, and it's really hard for people to break out of that, but that's something that we consistently try to pierce and question.
If I could just comment on that. Edward Abbey, the author of the Monkey Wrench Gang, wrote that the philosophy, the idea of unlimited growth is the philosophy of the cancer cell. And I think that we have an opportunity here to use that and raise that. But just so you know this, Abe, a lot of people on this call around the country deal a lot with their own local media reporters. I know we've had a few here at NEIS already too. But I always try and raise that question of what for. And I don't expect them to know the answer. I expect them to be asking the questions as reporters, as journalists, when they go out. And I would urge everyone else on the call to incorporate that into your interactions with journalists as well. Let them start the hue and cry and force the powers that be to justify their actions. But I think we have an opportunity here to actually utilize media in a constructive way.
Okay. I'd like you to continue with that, Dave, but let's see.
No.
The only other question that I see is the one, Kristen has another question. It's about transmission, and I think it's pretty well known by most of the people who are here today that the holdup on renewable energy is mainly transmission capacity. And to solve that problem, what solutions do you have, Abe?
Nothing's particularly snappy on that. And I see David's coming off, maybe he has something here, but we have similar problems with the regional transmission organizations, incumbent utilities that need to be cut through. And yeah, I'd welcome Dave if you have more to chime in on that.
Yeah, this is both local and national. I'll start with the local reference. In Illinois, we have this group called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition and the Illinois Environmental Council. My understanding is that these organizations are pushing some very significant transmission improvement legislation, which is going to take place in the Illinois legislature this spring session. But what I also want to mention is at the national level. Last year, one of our representatives, his name is Sean Caston, formulated a blockbuster transmission bill. And unfortunately, because of the way the Congress was set up, it went nowhere. But we contacted his office this year, and the intention is not to put this big bill back out there right away, but to introduce smaller pieces of it. And the focus of the bill was to do whatever was necessary to break up the logjam at FERC. Because as Connie Klein referenced earlier, and I think so, a couple of the other questioners and participants, there is so much power in the queue. And of course, not all of it is going to come to fruition for whatever reasons, investments or technology failure or whatever. But the last number I saw was 1,800 terawatts worth of energy, which is several times the entire output of the United States right now is waiting to be connected. And about 60 to 70% of that is renewables based. So Sean Caston, my feeling is he is a pro-nuclear person. He's an engineer, really likes the idea of small modulars, generally speaking. but he is also probably one of the most rabid climate activists in Congress that is out there. So I really think this is something to keep an eye on nationally, is there may be some opportunities to break up that logjam on transmission and to get some of these projects online if they're not canceled by Trump, number one. Number two, maybe we'll just pray for more hurricanes, wildfires, and tornadoes in the red states, and maybe that'll give some impetus to get some transmission reform.
And some of those wildfires are definitely in California, which
We'll pass along the bill numbers later. Oh, let me just mention too, there's an awful lot of good information that has been put in the chat tonight. A lot of good links. The link to the study, of course, is in there. But those of you who are attending tonight, you'll all get a copy of the chat at the end of the night. So you have plenty to do over the next few days. So I don't know if you wanted to say any more about transmission, Abe. Oh, actually, I had a little question. You get to show off a little bit on this one too. A number of years ago in Illinois, a study group was supposedly being put together on the next transmission grid. And yeah, okay. I don't know whatever happened to it, and I'd love to hear your story on it, but I want the group here tonight to know that Abe and PIRG really threw a monkey wrench into their process because they were violating administrative procedures. So I'll let you take it away from there.
Yes, the Illinois Commerce Commission, which is our utility regulator, which under its current leadership, I think is doing a great job, but former leadership did a study that was kind of one of these utility propaganda things, or was going to result in a utility propaganda thing paid for by the electric utilities. And they violated the Open Meetings Act. It was a government function. They did not invite me and other people who are known to be more critical to participate. They actively kept people out, and we filed a lawsuit, and we got a settlement where they basically buried the report, never published it. Yeah, that was fun.
Thanks for doing that.
the time is 8:31, and this meeting actually theoretically can close. I think that maybe I would turn it over to Dave to close the meeting unless there's more discussion that people at the meeting want. This is a very astute audience. It's very impressive to see the people who have come. And I'm just wondering if anybody else wants to say something before we close the meeting. Looks like it's up to you, Dave.
All right. Abe, thank you so much for doing this for us. I know we had to do a little gymnastics to make this happen, but it was pretty important, and I appreciate your flexibility on it and your being able to be with us tonight. If you could stick around a few minutes at the end too, to have a little conversation with Jan and myself, I'd appreciate it. Our next night with the experts will be March 27th, which is a Thursday, as they always are. We do not have a topic yet lined up. I would point out, though, that it is close to the anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident. And on the 11th of March is the 14th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster as well. So
It's very possible that we're going to talk about hydrogen production at that meeting.
Okay, great. I would mention that if you do have topics you would like for us to do sessions on, send us contacts, send us suggestions of names. We'll try and track people down, and we'll see if we can build that into the schedule as time goes on. So again, Abe, thank you very much for being with us tonight, and hope we didn't take too much time away from the family, and look forward to working with you again. You do great stuff, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, and really enjoyed the conversation with lots of great questions.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, and there's Evan and Stephanie responding. Bob. Hi, Bob.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
and Dave.
Ask you folks to sign off if you're not part of the board here, so thanks. Just give it a second.
I thought your name was Dreschler, Jackie.
It is. I spelled it wrong. I apologize for that.
Oh, okay.
Flying fingers, made a mistake. Sorry about that.
I thought Jackie did it.
No,
I thought she was going incognito.
I actually knew someone named Disler and it just popped in my head. So,
Mhm.
all right, Sharon and Roger and Larry, I'll ask you if you would sign off, please. And if not, I can do it fairly harmlessly, I think. Let's see here. Yeah, got to do this. We'll make sure they don't get banned from Zoom. Very rude of us. All right.
I bet Laro's not quite there. Are you there, Laro? Be good to see you, actually. And you too, Roger. Roger was our expert once.
Yep. Well, we're just gonna quietly remove these folks.
I
And
think Larry fell asleep.
all right, so Abe, any thoughts, comments, reactions? How was this for you?
It's good. I enjoyed the conversation. There's, I did,
Oh, 1 second before you go on.